The Punic Wars fought between Rome and Carthage in the Mediterranean Sea began in 246 BC and ultimately ended in 146 BC. Rome is in red, Carthage in blue. The First Punic War was ultimately started due to a conflict in the island of Sicily, which was currently under Carthaginian control. It started because a group called the Mamertines asked for help from both Carthage and Rome, and when they met in the middle, Rome wanted to take the island.
One of the most famous consuls of the First Punic War was Marcus Atilius Regulus. Elected in 256 BC, he commanded Rome at the Battle of Cape Ecnomus.
That would be the end. So as the Romans were building an invasion fleet, the size of which the world had never seen before, the Carthaginians were preparing an even bigger one to stop them. And in 256 BC, as the Roman invasion fleet made its way south, the stage was set for a humongous battle that saw 680 warships, around 300,000 men, fighting to decide the course of the war. To this day, the Battle of Cape Ecnomus remains possibly the largest naval battle in human history. All Roman fleet approached. The Carthaginian center feigned a retreat, luring the Romans in so their outstretched flanks could envelop them and get around the Roman corvus. A clever plan. But with such a huge battle and so many ships crowded together, the Carthaginians struggled to maneuver as hoped. And in the chaos, 3 separate battles emerged across the huge battle space. With the number of ships limiting their ability to maneuver, the Carthaginians became sitting ducks, and all the Romans had to do was start swinging. The Roman center came out on top, and were then able to turn around and rescue their pinned down flanks. The Battle of Cape Ecnomus was a Roman victory.
After the battle, Marcus landed in Carthage, realizing his term was nearly over, and wanting the glory of winning the war, he demanded Carthage's unconditional surrender. However, this backfired with his capture in the next battle. Carthage then demanded that he go to Rome and ask for their total surrender, and this is how he responded.
Sending you to Rome, and you have to force them to surrender, and if not, you'll have to come back and get tortured.
Sounds good to me. I'll head there right away. What's up, guys? I'm back.
How? You got captured by Carthage.
We worked something out, They told me to tell you to surrender, but, don't do that, guys, all right? Just trust me.
Okay.
Anyways, I gotta go back now. I'm gonna go get tortured, build some statues of me, in my honor.
Wait, what?
Yeah, have fun.
After Marcus Atilius Regulus' death, the war went about as poorly for Rome as it could have. They lost over 300 warships and 300,000 men in storms alone, yet somehow still managed to win the war. The war was ultimately ended after Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca signed a treaty which ultimately ended the war. However, the harsh punishments placed on Carthage ultimately sparked the Second Punic War. With the start of the Second Punic War, Hamilcar Barca would be located in Spain, where he would take control of the Carthaginian army and wage war on Rome. He would ultimately die after drowning trying to cross a river during a retreat, and his son Hannibal would take over his mission. After completing his campaign in Spain, Hannibal would attempt something that no one had ever thought of before. He would cross the Alps with his entire army, catching Rome by surprise. He crossed the Alps with nearly 25,000 men, 8,000 horses, and 37 elephants. Rome had no idea of the crossing, and he took northern Italy with little resistance. As Hannibal made his way through Rome, Rome knew they had to find a way to stop him. They met him at Cannae with a force far larger than his own, intending to destroy the general. Despite being highly outnumbered, the Battle of Cannae is still to this day considered one of the greatest military achievements in human history.
The battle commenced as the massive Roman troops smashed into the Carthaginian center. The shape of Hannibal's line ensured the overwhelming weight of the Romans hit his weakest troops first, and they were pushed back. Hannibal's outward bulge reversed inward, with the Romans being funneled in towards the weak center. Hannibal had positioned himself at the center to encourage the troops to hold out as long as possible against the Roman onslaught, because while the Romans were unleashing carnage on the center, Hannibal's cavalry needed time to do their job. The heavy cavalry on the left, after a barbaric fight, sent the Roman horse packing, with the consul Paulus even sustaining a severe head injury. He managed to move into the center to keep the battle going. Then, the heavy cavalry turned and approached Varro's cavalry from behind. At the first sight of the coming Carthaginian envelopment, Varro ordered his horsemen to flee the battlefield. The Carthaginians had won the cavalry battle. But back in the center, according to some accounts, Hannibal's line did eventually end up caving to the massive weight of the Romans, and they began to flee. The Romans pushed deeper, and organization within the army likely broke down as they became a giant mass trying to massacre the fleeing Carthaginians. They didn't realize that they were playing right into Hannibal's hands. At that moment, Hannibal's elite units, having done no fighting yet, and therefore fresh as a daisy, turned and smashed into the Roman sides. Many of these troops were wearing Roman helmets and armor they had picked up after previous battles, and the confused Romans may not have even realized they were the enemy. As Hannibal managed to regain the composure of his center and encourage them back into the fight, the Carthaginian cavalry swooped in from behind. And look at what lies before you. The total encirclement of a much larger force by a much smaller force. The Romans were trapped. Hannibal had unbelievably managed to use their own superiority in numbers against them. Rather than simply encircling them, he had actually allowed them to use their own immense power and push themselves into an encircled position. This was the genius of Cannae. And with that, the annihilation began. For hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered the helpless Romans from all sides. The terrified Romans were so tightly packed that at times they couldn't even lift their arms to defend themselves. The killing went on so long that the Carthaginians became exhausted from the non-stop massacre. And by the time the butchery came to an end, the grim toll spoke for itself. To Hannibal's several thousand lost, the Romans suffered 60 to 80,000 dead or captured. Yet another entire army wiped out by Hannibal.
After Rome's embarrassing defeat at Cannae, the Romans knew they needed to find a new strategy in order to defeat Hannibal. So they came up with a strategy known as fight anyone except for Hannibal. Rome would constantly target Hannibal's weaker armies which he could not command, and if Hannibal showed up, they would move their army to a different one. After using these tactics to wear down Hannibal's forces, one brave general known as Scipio Africanus ended up fighting Hannibal and ultimately defeating him. Hannibal was then forced to return back to Carthage to resupply his army and to defend Carthage from an invading Roman force, hoping to draw Hannibal away from Rome. After defending Carthage, he realized that he could not return to Rome and use the same strategy as before, as Rome would now know of his crossing of the Alps. They would ultimately sign peace, and Rome would win the war. And now for our question, did Rome deserve to win the Punic Wars? And, well, it depends. You can look at some of Rome's seemingly lucky events, such as winning the First Punic War despite losing 300 warships and 300,000 men in non-combat accidents. But you can also see that as a way that they were more determined to win the war. In the Second Punic War, if you look at the death toll, Hannibal absolutely destroyed them, but it only took them one battle to defeat Hannibal because he couldn't supply his army. So it really depends on, do you think Rome played to its advantages, or do you think Rome got lucky with the circumstances?
The Romans deserved to win the Punic Wars because they showed determination, discipline, and the ability to adapt. After early defeats, like the disaster at Cannae, they refused to give up. Instead of surrendering, they rebuilt their armies, trained harder, and developed new strategies. Rome didn't just fight with brute force, they played the long game. They cut off Carthaginian supply lines, took the war to Spain and North Africa, and forced Hannibal to retreat. Unlike Carthage, which relied heavily on one brilliant general, Rome built a system of strong leadership and citizen soldiers who were willing to fight for their republic. In the end, it wasn't just power that earned Rome victory. It was their resilience, organization, and the belief that the cause was worth fighting for.